Well, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we had big news in regards to the current trade situation and the negotiations to try and remove what are currently 10% temporary tariffs outside of China, especially when we're talking about the European Union, it's 10%. But Trump has come out now and he said the European Union has been taking advantage of the United States on trade and has been very difficult to deal with, talking about the trade barriers, the VATs, things of that nature. And so Trump says, therefore, I am recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union starting on June 1st of 2025. And what that means is there was a 90-day period that would have started, I want to say April 12th or April 13th. It was like within a week of Liberation Day or within a week and a half. And so what we can adjudicate from something like this is that the trade talks with the European Union are not going as well as Bessent and Trump have wanted. And so I'm sure they're communicating, and we've heard time and time again, whether it's India, whether it's Japan, whether it's South Korea, Vietnam, all of these talks are happening, things are getting close, and we would imagine behind the scenes with the European Union, based on the timeline, they're not going very well. And so this is something that Trump will do. It is a strategy to force a negotiation and force the European Union, put pressure on them to reach an agreement and in a negotiation give up more, because Trump is coming out now publicly and saying, we will tariff you 50% on June 1st. You've got these temporary tariffs that were supposedly going to last 90 days. They're still on, but now he's saying with the European Union specifically, which leads us to believe that the European Union is acting a little bit more stingent when it comes to the trade situation. Trump is saying, well, we don't like what's going on behind the scenes. They're not budging. We got to get them to budge. The way we do that is by pressuring them. I will make it public that they will face a 50% tariff on June 1st. Do I think they're going to get a 50% tariff on June 1st? Probably not. And if they did, that would put even more pressure on them to negotiate something immediately. Even if there is a 50% tariff that goes onto the EU on June 1st, there will be, I would imagine, a very quick negotiation. And there's going to be potentially things that Trump and Bessent want that they get within a few days of that tariff going on. I don't think the EU is going to hold out and say, oh, we're fine with this 50% tariff. Trump knows that if he puts pressure on the EU, and that's what this is just pressure, they will capitulate and they will give up certain things that right now they're not willing to give up. And that's basically what I would take from this. There's all these trade deals happening or potentially happening. There's negotiations right now happening. And I would imagine Bessent goes to Trump and says, look, we've got X, Y, and Z. We're close to completing these deals, but the European Union, they've been really bad. They haven't wanted to compromise on anything. It might be best to push them a little bit. And so you put out a tweet like this and this will push them. And so we'll see if this goes into a place 50%. But many people now understand that when Trump puts out these threats, he did something very similar with both Canada and Mexico to get certain things. He got a fentanyl czar on the Canadian border. He got Mexican troops to patrol their side of the border. He will do certain things like this and then say, well, no, because they've acted better, maybe there'll be better negotiations within the coming weeks, because June 1st, that's next week. Right now it's the 23rd. Then he'll say, well, no, we're not doing the 50% tariff. It's just a negotiation ploy to try and get more from the European Union, who he thinks possibly are not negotiating in a way that the United States likes. And so that's basically what this is. Like I said, I would be shocked if there is a 50% tariff. Number one, probably not going to be, because what you'll likely get is you'll get the EU cooperating more and willing to give up more things if they know there's going to be a 50% tariff slapped onto them. Even if it does get slapped onto them, you're going to see a situation to where almost immediately we would expect there to be some type of compromise and it would go back down. But we'll have to see. Maybe Trump is ultra serious about this. Maybe the EU digs their feet in and they stand strong and there's a 50% tariff on them for a longer period of time. I highly doubt that is what's going to be happening based off of the trajectory of this economy, based off of all the indicators that we've seen. We are in relatively a good state now. Everyone talks about the 10-year yield, the 20-year yield, the 30-year yield, how high it is. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the stuff that we're seeing in terms of inflation, the truflation, I know the truflation spiked up a little bit. Last time I saw it was around 2%. Previously it was 1.6%. That's energy. The crude oil price of crude oil has gone up. Truflation includes energy and food. And so there's a little bit more volatility to it. I still like using truflation as the ultimate inflation metric, but I don't think that's going to give us a higher core inflation reading. And this was the other big thing this morning, Trump taking aim at Apple and Tim Cook, saying that iPhones that are sold in the United States will be manufactured and built in the United States, not India or any place else. And the India reference was mainly based on the idea of the current situation with China and Trump wanting American companies to wean off of the Chinese use. Tim Cook and Apple saying, all right, we'll pivot to India. And that's why there's all that. It's not 100% why, but it's partially why there was all this movement about there's going to be a huge trade deal with India, and Apple was going to go to India for a short period. But Trump is saying, well, no, we want them built in the United States. And if it's not the case, a tariff of at least 25% will be paid by Apple to the U.S. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So he's saying, well, if you go to India to just replace China, you're going to be hit with a 25% tariff. And I would imagine this is something, see, if you're Trump and if you're the administration, what you don't want to have happen is, number one, iPhones are not going to cost $3,000. That's ridiculous. That's fear mongering. But the price of iPhones over, you could argue a short period of time will likely increase. I've heard it's about $100 increase. Maybe it's more. I don't know. 200, 300. The problem is the Chinese infrastructure is unmatched. And what Tim Cook has said in the past is he said, we want to produce iPhones in the United States. And once we have the automation, meaning the robots, we're going to do it. That's what he said. The issue for the administration here is the reason we wanted India to be a supplement to China was because it's very hard to take all of the iPhone productions, all of their production and manufacturing from China to the United States in the time frame of a few months. It's more of a period to where you wean off of it, and within 2 or 3 years, you start producing more and more phones in the US, and maybe there's some type of plan to where you can do that. We just don't want this to fall back onto Trump to where the price of iPhones goes up, whether it's $200 or $300. People fearmonger. The manual labor required for iPhones is not what people think it is. The problem is just the infrastructure and the amount of sheer workers. The labor force in China is so immense that it's and then they also work for cheaper, that it is a very good situation for Apple. And obviously, Apple being a US company, Trump is saying this is ridiculous. Those workers should be in the United States. And then they're just going to respond and say, well, the prices are going to increase. Okay, well, I don't think outsourcing to China, when they have said for the longest time they want to pass the United States as the number one most dominant global power, outsourcing one of our major companies is a smart thing. It's obviously not. But there's a give and a take here. There's a little bit of a balancing act, because you do have to understand that right now it is cheaper for them to make the iPhones in China. And that's why India was potentially going to be the weaning period to where you get the iPhones out of China. They go to India. You could say, well, that's not any better. But the thought process is that in a few years, they will end up being produced in the United States predominantly. We'll have to see. But there is that. And we'll see how this gets solved. You could talk about maybe a negotiation in terms of, I know Apple now has said by 2030, that's their commitment. So they say 2030, they're all going to be produced in the United States. Well, 2030, that's going to be a new administration. And if it's a liberal administration, you can bet that there might be some, that 25% tariff might be brought down. Who knows? It might be brought down tomorrow. This is how Trump is with these tariffs. But he says there's going to be a 25% tariff if they continue to make the iPhones in either now India or China. So we'll have to see in terms of that. And then we do have the situation with the 10-year yield. This is the bond market, the treasuries sitting at around 4.5%. So this is a 3-month high, as you can see. Or I guess the 3-month high was a few days ago on the 21st at around 4.6%. We saw an immediate dip in the yield and then a spike, and people were wondering, when this spiked on the 11th and that really scared Trump in terms of an indicator, the main reason was because the market was tanking. We've seen a recovery over the past few days. I'm actually going to show this, and the last I guess 2 or 3 days, it's been a little bit negative, but like the last month, big recoveries for Nvidia, 23%, Microsoft, Apple down 5%. Apple certainly, you would imagine, today took a pretty big hit because of the tariff announcement if they continue to make iPhones overseas. But Amazon up 8%, you've got Google up 5.5%, you've got Meta, Facebook up 18%. You have a lot of good performances here. And so when you see something like this, you'll likely get a little bit of a higher yield because that means more money is being dumped into the market. It's being taken out of the bond market. Now, you could also say, I mean, this is not a great reading. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, just for context, we saw the week before Trump entered, this would have been the 13th of January. So he entered the 20th. With higher inflation, we saw the yields at 4.8%. This is a 10-year yield average. And so this fear mongering, like I could understand if it was higher than it was on the 13th, but this crazy fear mongering when we just had much worse overall economic indicators the week before, this is during Biden's lame duck, the yield moves, and especially during a time like this to where Trump is implementing all of these tariffs, he's putting them on, he's taking them off. Let's not overreact to this. And also they say, well, maybe the yield is spiking as an indicator to say there's not a lot of trust right now in the economy because of Trump's new bill, which will certainly lower taxes, but it is going to add more to the debt. What is it, like 2.7 trillion over the course of like a 2.7 trillion increase over the course of 10 years, I think. So I don't know what would that be per year in terms of an increase. But I mean, there's a lot of good stuff with that bill, and we'll see what ends up happening. But yeah, you're cutting taxes, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. That's revenue loss for the government. Will it be made up through the economy, possibly lower unemployment? It is very possible, but you're also increasing the military budget. So we'll have to see. Either way, the yield, to me, there's just all these people who just overreact after everything. What did they say on the 13th of January when we had higher inflation, way higher trueflation? Were they freaking out? No. I mean, this is all just fear-mongering because it's Trump. You take a look at the last year. I mean, the yield ebbs and flows. We saw the yield back in September all the way down at 3.6%. And that was right before they decided to cut rates back in mid-September. Didn't they cut rates on the 18th of September, I want to say? And that actually spiked the yield a bit, which in a way you could understand because money leaves treasuries and enters the market because it's a more bullish time when they cut rates. But either way, guys, I think the yield's going to be under control within the next few months. We'd like to get it. I mean, if you take a look at where it was, back during Trump's really amazing situation, which would have been 2018, 2019. He had the yield at around 2.4, 2.5%. So it was a lot lower than it currently is. And so it is something to watch in terms of it. But that was like a cascade down effect that it had for a while. And then it started spiking as a result of all of the reactions with COVID. But either way, guys, that's just the current situation in terms of the bond market, people watching it. And look, we've had a return to not where we were back on the 20th, but we've had a positive return in terms of the market. So it's not surprising the yield is spiking a little bit. I'm sure Trump will be watching it for sure. And it's something that Trump definitely used as an indicator to stop the Liberation Day tariffs. That is undoubtedly true. But again, that was when the market was tanking. You had a tanking market and you had the yield spiking, which should not happen. And there's also the thought that Japan, who has a much worse GDP to debt ratio than we do, they might be unloading some of their treasuries. They have the most, out of any foreign country in the world, the most U.S. debt. And so that could be another problem as well, because their currency right now is ridiculously weak and their economy is not doing well. So we'll have to see what ends up happening with Japan. Although I don't think it'll be a problem to where they dump all of them, because it would hurt themselves if they did that. They dumped all the treasuries. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Also, like the video down below.